and I hear this too often for it not to be true, say, yeah, we don't even call the police anymore.
Yeah.
Because I know you don't have the people to respond to this. We don't even call anymore. So our ability to capture actual crime stats might be impacted by that
Yeah.
significantly because we just don't know how many people aren't calling in
Yeah.
crimes that have occurred
Because the cops aren't coming.
because the cops aren't coming.
Well, I usually start out interviews with just asking the folks that I'm interviewing to introduce themselves and tell me what city and state you're in.
Yeah. I'm Eric Burton, Deputy Chief of the Seattle Police Department. We're in Seattle, Washington right now. I've been on the department for 37 years. I'm working on 38. Spent the vast majority of that time in the Investigations Bureau. I did about 10 years in the Intel section doing intelligence work, and then about combined, I was a supervisor for 10 years in the narcotics section. I left for 10 years, did intel work, and then I went back for 4 years as the commander of the narcotics section. So about 14 years in narcotics work and 37 plus years overall on the department.
Wow, that's huge. Especially in light of the way that life has changed over the last 4 years. So when all of the shifts were happening, specifically here in Seattle with the defund movement, I mean, the police department here was being scrutinized significantly. Why did you stay?
Well, I mean, as 2020 rolled around and the riots started, I was originally, at the time, I was commanding the narcotics section, and everybody had to shave their beards, and we put on, crowd management uniforms and went out and were working alongside the other officers in the department. I had, again, that 10 years in intel work doing a lot of preparation and crowd management and demonstration awareness sort of activities. And so they took me into the command post to try to help figure out what was happening. And as you recall, we were getting our butts kicked night after night after night after night. And we were utilizing techniques and methods that had worked for years and years in terms of crowd management. But the difference was that during a normal protest, the protesters are protesting some event, some issue, and the police sort of stand in the way of any violence associated with that expression. In this particular instance, it was different than any time in the past. The police were the issue. The anger and the upset was at us. So when we were standing on a line and trying to protect a building or something, we were the focus of the anger. And so it made utilizing techniques that we had utilized for years no longer relevant and useful. So we were not doing well at all. And so I was in the command post for a period of time, helping kind of shape a reassessment. And eventually they asked me to go back out into the field and lead sort of the investigative approach to riots. And so we created the Riot, Violence, and Property Destruction Task Force. We took my narcotics detectives back inside and we began to look at the crimes that were occurring daily. And we tried to position ourselves in plain clothes to where we could see those crimes happening on a daily basis and then vector in uniformed folks to make arrests. And we also tried to, as you remember, everybody was dressed almost identically with the all black and APRs and the masks and the backpacks and the whole deal. It was very, very difficult to identify folks. But because we were now studying, and it's almost like in all criminal areas, you have a very small percentage of the group committing the vast majority of the crimes. And so we began to recognize, that's that person again in this, again tonight committing crimes, property destruction, or throwing, soup cans at police officers, or whatever the case, or throwing Molotov cocktails, or whatever they were doing. And we began to be able to identify these folks by their uniform, by their black outfit that they were wearing. And again, then because some of those circumstances, it's very violent and you can't arrest those people. But now if you follow that person away and now they're isolated, now you can bring uniformed folks in to make arrests and hold folks accountable. So to answer your question, it was meaningful work that I was doing. I was able to lead a new approach to, and we had immediate results from holding folks accountable for their actions. And it was a circumstance where when crowds would get together and then they would march and they would go by, Starbucks or Amazon's or whatever it was that seemed to draw their ire, things would develop, and then as the evening went on, somebody would get bold and they'd start breaking windows, and then more people would start breaking windows, and more people would start breaking windows. And so what we found is that when the first person breaks the window, and if then the bike officers right into the crowd snatch that sole person out of the crowd and take them away, now the rest of the crowd knows,
we're going to be arrested.
We're next. If we break a window, they have the ability to now, and that was the game changer, because when you have to deal with a crowd of people as one entity, that it's unmanageable. Because there's a lot of people that are just hanging out watching. It's kind of fun to just be a part of the mayhem, but they're not individually committing crimes. So to be able to hold individual folks accountable changed the course of the riots in Seattle and sort of returned us back to a much more of a demonstration protest type of an environment as opposed to the riot environment that we had been dealing with. So that was meaningful work. And I felt, I feel great affection for police officers who put themselves at risk for people they've never met before and likely will never meet again. And so if I can help people perform those tasks and be a part of that's where my gratification comes from. So that's why I stuck with it then.
Yeah.
And then I've gotten promoted a couple of times since then. So again, my ability to do good things for good people and try to rebuild the crushed morale of the Seattle Police Department, that to me is noble work, and I take it seriously, and I want to do that. So that's why I'm still here. And plus, I'm kind of high energy. I don't know what I would do if I wasn't doing something. I need to be doing something. So.
Yeah, I can totally relate because I had to switch addictions. I climb mountains and stuff now on top of the other stuff that I do. So, well, I think it's pretty fantastic that you made the decision to stay, because I know that there was a lot of pressure on Seattle police, and there still is a lot of pressure on Seattle police. And I know that your police force has decreased significantly. So when I worked in social services back in 2014 and 15, I had some pretty in 16 and 17, I had some pretty regular interactions with a lot of the beat cops downtown. And things have really started to shift in Seattle quite a bit with the homeless population, specifically downtown. And I had asked an officer one day, Uh, why were some of these people not being arrested when they were blatantly committing, drug possession and drug use crimes and other crimes openly? And, he shared with me that there were, that they were prohibited essentially from doing parts of their job because things, charges weren't going to be filed. And so they were given directives to not do certain things. And so when did that shift really start to happen where things were sort of ignored?
Yeah, well, we had the Blake decision, which essentially was, those aren't my pants.
Right.
Case. And
yeah, I'm wearing them, but they're not mine.
They're not mine, and I'm not responsible for the drugs that were in the pants. And so it essentially made drug possession, it essentially struck down drug possession, a violation as a law. So we could still make arrests for dealing drugs or possessing dealer quantities of drugs, but user level drugs, essentially we couldn't prosecute for a period of time.
What was the specification for user level drugs?
I don't remember what it was. It was pretty, it was probably a day's use for an average addict, whatever that amount was for whatever drug it was. And one of the other packaged for distribution would be like, if you had individual bindles of, to indicate, and cash, and maybe a list of, not that people do journals anymore as much, but everything's on the phones, but indicators that this was a drug dealing operation. But for the most part, drug enforcement plummeted, exponentially with the Blake decision, and it took us a while to get a replacement. And now the replacement ordinance in Seattle, it's not a state law that we're enforcing. We're enforcing the city's open use ordinance, which encourages diversion to a LEAD program as opposed to jail. Mm-hmm. And so that's currently what we're operating under. We've made a number, a couple hundred arrests, but those folks aren't booked into jail. Sometimes the arrests lead to warrant, the person has an arrest warrant or something like that, or we make an arrest for open use and they're in possession of a stolen firearm or some such thing like that. Those people can be booked into jail for those other crimes. But for open use, most of the time it's a warm handoff to a lead social worker. Mm-hmm. And then they offer services to that person. But
now, when you say offer services, is the individual who has been referred to LEAD required
No.
to engage in those services?
No.
So how effective, and maybe you know and maybe you don't know, of the couple hundred citations or engagements with law enforcement that have happened with this open use ordinance, how many of those folks have you seen get and turn their life around?
I don't have that information, but I can tell you that in many instances, the people that we contact are back out in the areas where they were arrested within hours. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, I think that sort of, people in that circumstance in the drug community talk. Mm-hmm. And they say, yeah, I got diverted. I, talked to somebody for a bit. And they, I'm free to leave. Yeah. And so I talked to this person for a bit. I might have an appointment next week to talk to somebody, and then I'm back out. And we know that addicts that are in the environment where they use are going to use. Mm-hmm. That's what's going to happen. So, I don't know. I'm hopeful. I'm like to be an optimist. I would like to believe that folks have taken advantage of services, but I also know from many years of work in narcotics and dealing with folks suffering from addiction that they're not going to remember an appointment next week
Right.
to meet with somebody. That as soon as they're out and they're trying to find drugs, they don't remember the meeting they're supposed to have. So
Are law enforcement documenting the engagements with individuals?
Yeah.
And so, and does it come up, like if you run somebody's name, does that information come
we're
up?
working on that right now. That's sort of the obvious next step, because what we want to know is we want to be able to track how often have we arrested this person. How often have we arrested this person for open use? And because at some point that we need to probably explore how many opportunities do we give before
taking some kind of action.
Before we increase the level of intervention. And so we are working that out right now, trying to set up tracking for that.
Well, we're going to have to do a follow-up show because I'm going to want to know what that looks like, because arrests incentivizes change. So, which we've discussed a little bit about.
Arrests do, but
arrest and incarceration. Let me just follow up with that a little bit. Arrest and incarceration, because if it weren't for incarceration, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. And incarceration without continued substance use. I want to say that, including medically prescribed substance use. So, because what that does is it gives the addict clarity enough to take action if the right opportunities are presented. And we can absolutely change the tool. Yeah. We can change the tool. You've lived in Seattle, obviously, for a long time, or at least have worked here for a very long time. So let's talk a little bit about the homeless population. How much I know how much it's grown. Yeah. When did you really start to see the explosion or the increased growth of the homeless population here in Seattle?
Again, 37 years in Seattle and working as a police officer in Seattle, we've had homeless folks forever, during my career. But we've never seen the numbers like we've seen over the last few years. Yeah. And what's hard to know is how much of that is brought on by the growing addiction problem, the proliferation of fentanyl, the period of time where we did not have an enforcement option available for drug use, where it may be that folks were just kind of came out of the woodwork, came out of hidden encampments or other hiding places and became more used to public use. I don't know how to measure that, but certainly, and I don't know whether mental health issues preceded drug addiction, or if drug addiction precedes mental health issues, and I'm sure that there's probably instances of things going both directions, but it certainly seems like the co-occurrence of mental health addiction or mental health and addiction is just prevalent in Seattle right now. And we don't have the resources to provide the support to folks that we need. And so consequently, we've got, the 1500 block of 3rd Avenue is often, there might be 100 people out there that are suffering from addiction and have some varying degree of mental health issues affecting them as well. And it's sad. Yeah. It's brutal. It's sad.
Are you familiar with the data around calls and encampments and housing facilities and things like that?
I deal in that world all the time. I don't have them memorized, but I know, generally speaking, what we're seeing and what we've seen over time.
Have we seen an increase here in Seattle in the calls to encampment areas and permanent supportive housing places? Even if not just seen an increase, how if we were to put a percentage, if you could speculate a percentage of where the calls are going, what is the percentage to those areas?
I think that we're seeing certainly for in shootings, for example.
Yeah.
We went through a little bit of a bump with encampment related shootings in 2022, 2023. And now we're seeing a decrease in they were probably up around 15%, 20% of our shootings, and they're I think down around 6 or 8% of our shootings now, which is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly, I think the connection is, I think the obvious connection that you're speaking about is like addicts don't have any means of income to feed their addiction. Mm-hmm. So they've got to find a way to acquire drugs.
Yes. Drugs aren't free.
Drugs aren't free. So they're going to have to commit crimes mm-hmm. to feed that addiction. So certainly, wherever you have groups of addicts, you're going to have crime because that's the way that they have to feed their addiction. In most cases, folks have lost, if they had a job, they've lost the job. If they had a family, they may have lost their family. They've lost everything of value. And so they have to resort to crime to feed that addiction. That's obvious, but I think it's important to remind people that they're not evil people. They're people who have to feed their addiction.
So they're innovating in the best way they can, being an addict on the street.
They only have some options, and those options most of the time include crime.
Yeah. So would you speculate that the majority of people that are actually in the encampments are drug addicts?
I think that a large number of folks are. I think there are also certainly encampments where, and I think the encampments, we've seen some smaller encampments where people aren't addicts. They're just living, they're homeless. But they are not addicts. And
I've seen a couple of those very small ones. I think Josh and I came across one.
They sort of hang out. Those folks want to hang out together because they don't want to hang out.
They don't want to be around the mess.
They don't want to be around the mayhem. So, So I don't know what the percentage is, but I would say it's a decently
pretty high.
I would say there's a lot of drug use in encampments, and we know that we unfortunately find folks deceased of overdose in encampments. And so that would be an indicator that certainly there's a lot of drug use there.
Of the crimes being called into the encampments, like if you can speculate on a percentage of OD calls for those calls?
I don't know. I can tell you that overdose is one of the most dispatched calls for the Seattle Police Department. I mean, it's in the top 3. We've had 5 today that I've counted come across radio.
How many overdoses do you think are being reported over the radio?
That's a good question.
We have a lot of overdoses right now.
I would imagine that there are overdoses certainly that we're not hearing about. Even though it's not all of them, we're hearing about a lot of them. It's one of our top 3 calls in 911 for the last several years.
We've seen a decrease in police force.
Yep.
And we've seen an increase in all this stuff. How are you guys managing?
We're doing everything we can to streamline. We're doing everything we can to they say do more with less, but eventually you do less with less. And that's the reality of where we are now. We cannot do some of the things that we used to do. We cannot do the emphasis work that we used to do. We can't do proactive response, and most drug arrests it's proactive, where the officers are going out and spending the time to find people that are using, possessing, dealing drugs. That's not just you just can't glance over, and it requires some coordination and some effort. And we have a responsibility to respond to people that are actually having an emergency at the time, at the moment. And we've seen our response time to priority 1 calls, which is defined as immediate threat to life circumstance. We've seen our response times to those types of calls increasing. Maybe only a minute or two, but if your life is in immediate danger, a minute or two can be the difference.
Could mean your life.
It could mean the difference between life and death. And so we have got to prioritize 911 response, emergency response, particularly priority 1 calls. And we are currently averaging about 15 officers below minimum safe staffing levels. So when you think a city the size of Seattle, our minimum safe staffing might be 80 officers on at a time, or 85 officers on at a time. And we might be at 70. We might be at 60. We sometimes get into the 50s. And yet there's no difference in the flow of 911 calls.
Right.
So we are going as fast as we can. It's frustrating for people because there's a lot of lower level property crime stuff where the suspect's gone. It's just a report. We're trying to shift as much of that to phone reporting as we can and online reporting as we can. Again, we don't have the officers to be able to respond and do that type of work anymore because we're going call to call to call on priority 1 calls. So it's significant, and it impacts our ability to respond to lower level priority calls. And the biggest impact is on our ability to do proactive work that isn't the result of a 911 call.
How much are the encampments in permanent supportive housing? I know there are a lot of calls that go to this permanent supportive housing buildings, and
there's some of the higher use.
And how
facilities.
much is that affecting your priority 1 calls, because you guys are responding to that?
Well, I mean,
and I know some of those are priority 1 calls.
Yeah, some are. That's what I was just about to say, is that high utilizer facilities draw on our limited resources. They just do.
Yeah.
That's just reality. But we don't prioritize those calls differently because of that.
Right.
They're still prioritized based on the circumstances involved with the case.
Right.
But it's certainly a draw. It's certainly a draw on limited police resources.
I feel like Seattle's communities have been a little bipolar when it comes to, we don't want the police. Hey, where are you? We need the police. And I don't expect you to have an opinion about that, but it does make me wonder how frustrated do some of, the constituents in Seattle become when police can't come out and respond to a burglary because of the limited resources or something to that effect.
Yeah. Well, it's 100% true that when the incident happens in somebody's life and they have to call 911, that is the most important thing going on in the city to that person.
Right. That person.
And so it is frustrating for people when officers, when they call for an officer and they don't respond in a reasonable period of time. It's hugely frustrating, and I totally understand that. But we are triaging calls as they come in based upon the circumstances. And so a call that does not have a threat to safety is going to be handled when we have officers available that aren't responding to calls that have to do with personal safety. So it is frustrating for folks. We deal with it all the time, and it's it's incredibly frustrating for us because law enforcement officers want to feel like they are helping people. And when we simply can't and we get that negative feedback, nobody feels worse about that than the police do. If you go out on the street here in downtown Seattle and you look down the block and you see disorder, and you see mess, and you see people, obviously hunched over and, high, and you see, folks trying to walk through and navigate this mayhem, police officers feel horrible about that because they want to be able to create the environment where people feel safe and secure and can bring their kids down and walk around. And so that is disheartening. It is disheartening for police officers to deal with that. And I try when I go out to roll calls. I talk to roll calls a lot, and I do a lot of section meetings. I just try to remind people that, just continue to do the best job you can. We understand that we're understaffed. We understand that for nobody's fault. We're not going to be. There's people that are going to be disappointed in the outcomes, and just apologize and tell them we wish we could have got here sooner, and we understand. But it is disheartening. So hopefully we can turn that around and get some staffing back up, and we're working really hard at making that happen.
What is the emotional toll that this homeless crisis is having on officers who are having to work and deal with people in crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I think dealing with folks in crisis and dealing with the challenges posed by that is actually one of the reasons you get into law enforcement. You want to be able to help folks, but again, it's just the sheer volume. And the inability to you're always swimming upstream. Seems like no matter what we do, there's an endless supply of folks needing the same stuff. So I think
I would imagine it feels like that too. Like this, it's endless.
Yeah, and so that's why I'm excited about talking about these things with you and discovering ways that we can maybe change the course of things for people and actually make meaningful interventions and stopping the cycle, because we've got to figure out a way to it is insufficient, and even if we had enough officers to respond to all of these things in a timely manner, it still doesn't solve the problem. No. Police officers are only there for a short period of time. So what happened after that initial intervention? Then what happens? And that's where we're breaking down.
There are a lot of law enforcement officers that I've gotten the opportunity to talk to and interview in a lot of communities, and it's going away, have been able to know the people, even if they've arrested them. They often will know the people in their communities. Is that even possible anymore to be able to build any kind of rapport and relationship because of the decrease in staffing?
It's challenge. It's certainly an additional challenging factor, but that's happening. That's certainly happening. Officers know high utilizers. Yes. Officers, if a police officer works 4 days a week, they may see the same person 4 days that week. So right. That's not unusual. Officers really do want to have alternatives to get folks help, and again, to break the cycle. But it's challenging because certainly it used to be, and you mentioned beat cops earlier. Yeah. We haven't had beat cops in a while. Beat cops are those folks that form the relationships with the same people every day on the street. And so now it's district officers who happen to be called to the same areas and see the same people, as opposed to proactively going out and talking with folks on a daily basis. So, yeah, it's changed quite a bit.
Yeah. I mean, I would imagine that it would have to. We have an increasing number of folks on one side and a decreasing number of folks on the other, and then a whole bunch of high priority calls. And I know that crime rates have definitely increased. We've just stopped arresting people for some of them. So, in everywhere, not just Seattle. Do you have? Go ahead.
Well, just to follow up, one of the
Yeah.
things that you'd mentioned earlier
Yeah.
about officers, and the frustration would not be, or the citizens' frustration with our inability to be effectively respond to some of their property crimes, et cetera. I think, unfortunately, some folks, and I hear this too often for it not to be true, say, "Yeah, we don't even call the police anymore."
Yeah.
Because I know you don't have the people to respond to this. We don't even call anymore. So our ability to capture actual crime stats might be impacted by that significantly, because we just don't know how many people aren't calling in crimes that have occurred.
Because the cops aren't coming. And, the tragic truth about that statement is that for the addicted Ginny, I could always count on the cops coming. I could count on, if I used openly and public, that if a police officer was downwind of me or within eye shot of me, I was going down. And, I think that we've adulterated this idea that is some kind of terrible, torturous punishment, because every time I was arrested, I got the opportunity to gain some clarity. And I think that we're doing people a great disservice because the cops aren't coming. The cops are not coming. And for me, that breaks my heart, because I know there are so many Ginnies that are caught in a place that they're probably never going to come out of, because everything is left up to consent.
It is certainly, there's a narrative that the community talks about these issues, and then there's what the police officers see on the street every day.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes community has talked themselves into what sounds like a good program because, it's compassionate, it's thoughtful towards the perspective of, what they believe to be the perspective of the addict. But I do not believe it's compassionate at all to leave people on the street,
killing themselves,
smoking a drug that will kill them. It's not, and leaving them in an environment, dirty, unhealthy, where they're subjected to being victimized by other criminals, not treated for their addiction, not intervening when we have an opportunity to intervene. That's not compassionate. That's leaving people to die.
I agree with you 100%. That's probably one of my biggest taglines, is that this isn't compassion, that we're literally killing people, and we're calling it compassion.
Well-intentioned.
Well-intentioned. And that's the thing. When I worked in social services here in Seattle, there was an intention to do well. I personally I struggled with it internally because I felt like I was killing my friends. And I felt like I didn't have autonomy to help them get to where I was. And I felt like it was like dropping a rat in the maze. And then as soon as they were about to exit, the door would be dropped down in front of them, and then we reward them for failing. And we're denying people the opportunity to get to where I am. And I don't think that that's right. That's not compassion. When I make my kid deal with consequences because her behavior is counterproductive, it is compassionate for me to set up guardrails so that she can learn her lesson and make wise decisions to not continue to do those things in her life.
I think that reference reminds me that I think people ought to consider these issues through the lens of if it was their kid.
That's right. And, I've actually had people tell me, well, that's going to be offensive to people if you suggest that those people could be their kids. Well, they could.
Yeah.
They could.
Yeah.
These are people's brothers, sons, daughters, husbands, wives, uncles, aunts, cousins, nephews, grandchildren. But for the grace of God go I, and I try not to forget that.
Yeah. I think that if folks genuinely ask themselves, if that was my kid, if that was my sibling, if that was my mom, if that was my dad, Would I want somebody to intervene?
Yeah. Would I want them living in squalor and being victimized?
Yeah, because we're not forcing people to do anything. Yeah,
Right.
that's not compassion.
It's not. It absolutely is not. Do you have any idea how much financial resources through the police department are being focused on homelessness and housing first?
I know as a city and as a region, we're spending a lot of money
Yeah.
on homelessness. And, with, debatable results. I think some would argue. I mean, I think we've certainly done some things well. And we have some wins under the belt, but I would love to have more wins under the belt. And I don't think it doesn't appear when you look at the numbers of homelessness and you look at the amount of money that we've spent on homelessness, it doesn't appear that we're spending it correctly, because we spend more and more and more, and we get more homeless and more homeless. So
Yeah.
something we gotta call an audible. We gotta examine and assess and see if there might be other things that we can do. But there's no simple answers to this. So we've got to build into the system an opportunity to intervene in the addiction cycle in a meaningful way, not for the half an hour that it takes me to arrest an addict and hand them to somebody who's going to have a conversation with them and then off they go.
Right.
That's not
an intervention.
That's not a meaningful intervention.
That's a blip in that
Yeah.
person's time and space, and
Yeah.
their focus is still 100% the drug.
Yep.
And they just know that it's just a matter of insignificant time until they're able to go back to what they were doing.
Yep.
Does SPD have a role in working with KCRHA around any of the issues with Housing First?
We don't have any direct reaction.
No connection.
We have an alternative response team, an ART team, that works 7 days a week with the unified care team that's run by the city. I'm sure that UCT has some interaction with KCRHA. The police department doesn't have much specific interaction with KCRHA because they're the county. I mean, some of the services and whatnot, I'm sure, bump up against each other, but
Yeah.
We're not directly working with them.
Okay. What does SPD need to respond more efficiently and effectively to the homeless crisis?
Well, first and foremost, we need more officers. We're hiring. We certainly need more police officers. We're dramatically understaffed. It's critical staffing shortfall. In 2019, we had 250 detectives in our investigations bureau. I think we have 104 as of today. More than half, significantly more than half cut. Our overall numbers were hovering around near 1,400 in 2019, and we are now in the 900s.
That's significant.
It's huge. It's a huge number of
and what is the
officers.
population of the city of Seattle?
Boy, don't ask me that. It's
big.
It's big, and certainly during the workday, it's even bigger because people influx
Commute.
into the city.
Is there sorry to interrupt, but is there an intended ratio of individuals to police officer for policing? Does that question make sense? Did I ask that?
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yes, there. What there are is it's officers per 10,000.
Okay.
And Seattle has in 2019 we were low.
Yeah.
So we're really low.
We're like exponentially
We're
low right
exponentially low right now. While this has been a national thing, I mean, law
now.
enforcement
Yeah, it's
suffered.
happening all across the nation. Yeah.
Law enforcement suffered a real blow to sort of the community's conception of law enforcement. I can tell you from my perspective, from being able to watch these men and women work every day, it's the most noble profession that I know of. They literally put themselves at risk every day for people they've never met before and will likely never meet again.
Yeah.
I don't know what's more noble than that.
Yeah.
And so, and we really do have an opportunity to help people, help citizens when they're experiencing their very worst day ever. And so, that's gratifying. And
Yeah.
so it's still a great profession. It's still a great job to have. But I think that we've suffered, sort of an image, our image was tarnished, by something that happened thousands of miles away. In fact, right before the George Floyd incident, Seattle PD was relatively popular in the community. Like we'd come out of, a near decade consent decree. We had made massive changes. I don't know of a police department. I traveled around and I talked to a lot and visited a lot of police departments. I don't know of a police department in the country that has more scrutiny and more accountability for police officers than Seattle PD does. And we've had that for some time. We are widely respected in the law enforcement community nationally. But when George Floyd happened, sort of the outrage and, from that, just senseless death, smeared us all. And I think we're still coming out of that. We're still dealing with it.
Yeah. So I'm guessing the budgets has significantly decreased for law enforcement.
There was a defund movement, and they certainly took some money away, but it was mostly that the money was provisoed, so they could. I mean, it appeared to me that, well, we didn't really. The argument might have been from the previous city council that, well, we didn't really defund you. We just provisoed the money so you couldn't spend it. Well, is that the same? I mean, it's kind of the same.
Yeah.
If you can't spend the money, then you can't spend the money.
Then you don't have it.
Then you don't have it. So, but we, we are very, very blessed, and I think speaks to the change in narrative in Seattle. We have a very, very supportive mayor who was elected with.
Well, he's a Seattle native, isn't he?
He is a Seattle native.
He grew up here. He went to Chief Sealth, I believe.
Yeah, and he wants to see the city return to greatness. I think we're on the way. And then the city council that we have right now, the police officers' contract, which had been expired for 3.5 years. Again, that's sort of those kinds of things on the heels of George Floyd riots, on the heels of the pandemic, that officers didn't telecommute. I mean, who came to work every day, dealt with all the obstacles and obstructions and frustrations of COVID, but came to work every day. And then to be the only union that doesn't have a contract for 3.5 years, officers perceive that as extraordinarily disrespectful. We have a new mayor. We have a new city council. Their newly negotiated contract, which includes a 23% raise, which is fantastic because SPD should be the highest paid police department in the state, bar none. There's nobody that has more complexity, is under more scrutiny, deals with more social crisis than Seattle PD, and we should be compensated at the top end of that. But they were down around 15 or 20th highest paid. So these things, the council passed that approval of that contract 8-1.
Yeah.
8-1. That is a massive change in sort of the politics of the city.
Yeah.
So we have a very, very supportive city council and a very supportive mayor so I think we have an opportunity to turn things around here.
Do you think there's going to be more of a shift, or that there is more of a shift toward accountability right now? Or are we on our way?
I certainly hope so. I mean, it's the carrot and stick thing, and I think we need both.
Yeah.
But I think we've sort of abandoned. We thought that the stick was unnecessarily punishing, not realizing how important that component is in providing a compassionate path for changing the life of an addict. So absolutely, I think hopefully we're on the path to that. I really hope we are.
Do you think that the message is, because I feel like most law enforcement that I talk to has a similar experience as, not just knowing that I got clean because of jail and prison, but that I know thousands of people who have. Do you think that, and I know a lot of law enforcement know people that they have arrested who got clean because of that. Do you think that people are becoming more receptive to that message, or has that message started to penetrate some of our lawmakers, policymakers, and decision makers?
Well, I think that those of us that work in the industry know that first.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to judge what other people know
Yeah.
or how pervasive that perspective has begun to spread. But I can tell you, I went to the IF Projects fundraiser, and it was awesome to see these women, former convicts,
Yeah.
get up on stage and tell their story, and every single one of them attributed their success to having been arrested and then being led towards a personal accountability perspective. And now they're proud of themselves, and they should be proud of themselves because they've overcome the old way they did things, and they've charted a new course, and they're being successful. So, it's the exact same thing as like the folks that work out. That if you work out with a partner, you're going to be more accountable because now, somebody's going to hold you to account to whether or not you show up for the workout or not, right? Well, it's no different. We need to show up for people so that they can work out.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Is there anything else that you want our viewers to know?
I think we talked about this before the cameras went on a little bit, but just that, arresting people and holding people against their will can be a good thing.
Yes.
Particularly if we provide services and opportunities because every time, I cannot tell you the number of people that I've arrested for narcotics crimes. And many of the people that I've arrested for other crimes are addicts, and they were committing the crimes that they were committing because of their addiction and the need to feed that addiction. The moment of clarity for them comes, like, I need to stop this. I need to change the course. I need to do something different in my life. That comes at the time of arrest.
Yes.
We need to seize that time.
Yes.
And provide an opportunity for them to not. It's not enough to say, and I think that this is where the narrative and where reality and the narrative sort of clash is. It's not enough to say, I've arrested you for open use. Here's a person that can direct you to services, and then have a nice day. Because that addict, we haven't interrupted. We've just talked to them for a moment in time. They now talk to somebody else for a moment in time, and then they are immediately released to go back to where they just were using drugs.
Yeah.
When the addict goes back to where they were just using drugs, the addict always again uses drugs.
That's right.
And so I would like people to think and consider the most compassionate thing that we could do would be to interrupt that cycle of addiction and then provide real meaningful care for those people without the opportunity to go back.
That's right. During incarceration, during that suspended time, separation, separation, services, and accountability. They work together. It's a process. It's a model
Yeah.
And it can be replicated very easily.
And you think about inpatient treatment.
Mm-hmm.
Like when folks, the people that I've known in my life who've had, had some incident occur where they say, that's enough, I've got to make a change. And I'm talking about alcohol addiction or any type of addiction. When that person goes to an inpatient, like, I'm spending the next month in inpatient treatment, and we're talking about like for alcohol. We're not talking about fentanyl. We're not talking about heroin. We're not talking about meth. They have to commit to that. And in many instances, they can't leave.
Right.
Because the addict wants to leave and wants to get back to where the drugs are.
Yeah.
So allowing them back to where the drugs are is not compassionate.
It's not.
It's the opposite.
It's like with the guy sitting on the corner stabbing himself repeatedly with a knife and just walking past him. But that's not what we do in society, right? If somebody was sitting there repeatedly stabbing themselves, we'd call services. We'd have him removed from the destructive path. We would keep him isolated from society until we were able to get him intentional and effective help, and then release him back into a supported environment.
Yeah.
But we're not doing that with others.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time today.
Appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
Yeah, let's stay connected because I want to do some ride-alongs
You got it.
and stuff like that.
You got it.